What's up, YouTube? Welcome back. Got another video here today. I have here the Process West VertiCooler. It's just another top mount intercooler, but it's much thicker than stock. And then based on the design, it's called a VertiCooler because it sounds more like upright. That should create better airflow, and since it's a bigger core, I should get a colder charge going into the engine. We got some pretty good instructions here from Process West themselves with lots of pictures. So I'm going to show you guys step by step everything you need to do to get this guy installed. The first thing you're going to do is raise up the front end of the car. So I already have my car raised up and I have jack stands. The reason you want to raise it up is because we're going to have to remove the under panel as well as the metal shield underneath the turbo. We're going to want to remove that because we have to get to the inlet and outlet of the turbo to remove some of those hoses and piping. So once you have the car lifted up on jack stands, you want to open up the hood, and then I already have mine removed, but you want to remove the plastic engine cover that goes here. If you have a strut bar, ideally you want to remove it now because it's going to get in the way of removing the stock intercooler, and getting the new VertiCooler in is just going to make it tougher. Be aware, not all strut bars will work with the VertiCooler. I've heard that this one does fit apparently. I might just have to tilt it so that it's flat instead of being angled forward. You want to remove the air snorkel, and then for me, in order for me to remove the snorkel, I have to remove the lid off my airbox, so I'm going to do that as well. So once you have the snorkel removed and the lid, the next thing is, obviously remember, strut bar, remove that if you have one. And then you want to go underneath the car, and I don't know how well you guys can see, but you want to remove this plastic cover here, the one that keeps rocks out. Once you remove that, you also want to remove this metal plate, the one that's underneath the turbo. So in order to remove the metal skid plate, there are 4 screws holding it in. The 4 screws are 12 millimeters. These screws are going to be pretty tough, so just crack them loose first. Be gentle when you're taking them out. Some of mine, you can tell that the bottom or the ends of the bolt are a little rusty, so that's why they were kind of hard to get off. So before I put them on, I'm just going to try to scrape off as much of that rust. Well, that plate is actually pretty heavy. It's a lot heavier than it looks. So once you undo all 4 bolts, be careful because it might just drop. So just be aware of that. Once you have everything underneath removed, you already got my strut bar removed. The next thing to do is to remove the intercooler. So the stock intercooler has 2 mounting points. There's one up there where my finger is, and there's one over here where my other finger is. So there's 2 there, and then you have 1 hose clamp here, and then another hose clamp, it's kind of hard to see, down here, right by the throttle body. So undo those 2 hose clamps, undo those 2 bolts, and then you should be able to pull upwards and wiggle the throttle body section of the intercooler off, and then I pull off the other end. One thing that might help also is removing this bracket over here. So there's just the bolt on the top of the intercooler, and then over here at the bottom where my fingers are, there's 2 bolts there, and then there's a clip that holds it onto this hose, and you can take this out, and then that way that gives you more space. I think you also have to remove this bracket anyway. Alright guys, so now the intercooler is removed, the next thing to do is you want to go down to where the inlet is for the turbo, and then you want to remove the intake duct. So I have the Cobb Big SF intake, so that's what this coupler is here. So if you have the factory one, same thing, just undo the hose clamp and pull it off. And then what we're going to start doing is taking apart this inlet here. So there's a few hoses. I'm going to show you which hoses you need to remove. What I recommend is take a picture of how everything looks before you start taking it apart. That way when you put everything back together, you know exactly which hoses go where. I think they only fit on one specific spot each, but just be better safe than sorry. And then there's 2 bolts holding in the inlet. You have to be very careful with this one. If you have a stock inlet, the stock one is plastic, and these apparently are prone to cracking when you remove them and then put them back on. So just be very careful, because if you crack this, you're gonna get a leak and you're gonna have problems. I might do an aftermarket inlet, an aluminum one. I think the Grimspeed one is aluminum. So I've heard good things about that one. Ideally, I guess if you're gonna be doing this whole intercooler, probably a good idea to just upgrade this inlet while you're down here. But I'm gonna try to retain mine So I'm going to be very careful with removing it to make sure nothing breaks. So I'm trying to push the coupler that goes to the turbo inlet that way, but I can't. This filter is also moving with it because the whole intake system is moving that way. So there's a bracket here that's holding the tube in place. This bracket is keeping the intake from moving more to the left. So I'm just gonna undo, there's 2 bolts here. I'm just gonna undo these 2 bolts to loosen this bracket. That way I can move my intake more to the left so I can get access to that inlet. Okay, so now my inlet is disconnected. So we have here, there's one tube on the side that kind of wraps underneath the inlet. So you want to undo that one, no clip on that one. There's another one here on the left side, no clip on that one either. And then over here in the middle, there is this bigger hose. This is the biggest one out of those 3. This one does have a clip, like a clamp. So just undo the clamp, move it over, upwards. You won't mix this up because this one, there's only one port going in the side. This is the biggest of the 2 on top. This one's smaller, so obviously these only fit in one specific spot. So I was able to get this one off, this side one off. Just pull on it, you know, eventually it'll start coming out. I got the big one here with the hose clamp. Just move the clamp up, pull upwards, pretty easy. This other one here, the one that was on the left side, same thing, pulled up on that one. And then there's another hose up top here where the bypass valve is. So that one, you know, just pull up on it and comes right out. There is a hose clamp right here that's holding the bypass valve to the charge pipe, I guess you can call it. So the pipe that goes up to the intercooler. So there is a hose clamp there, so you will have to loosen this hose clamp as well. So there's a connector over here, right there where my finger is. I think that one goes to the bypass valve. So I got the inlet loose now. The only thing that's holding it in place is the bypass valve. It's loose, but like it's not coming off of either the, it's not coming off the inlet or the charge pipe. And then there's electrical connection on the back, and that thing is so difficult to remove. I don't know what's going on. So that's what this wire is over here. So I've been finagling to try to either get the bypass valve off, and then once I have that off, then I can worry about getting the connector off. Or if I got the connector off, then I could just fully spin this around back and forth. And also there was a little gasket that was in between the inlet and the turbo. It looks like this. So make sure you don't lose this. It's kind of grimy and dirty, so I'm going to clean it off a little bit too. But yeah, make sure you don't lose this. You're going to need this, otherwise you're going to have air leaks. And make sure you don't damage it. So this one appears to be in good condition. There's nothing wrong with it, no tears or anything like that. So that's good. So now it's just a matter of getting this guy off. So I'm going to keep working on this, see if I can either get the bypass valve to come off first or this connector on the backside, which is extremely hard to get off. I finally got this plug. This is the one I was trying to get off. This is the biggest pain in the ass, I'm going to be honest. This plug goes, so I don't know if you guys can see on the backside of the, oh, right there. See that gray connector over there? Right underneath the bypass valve? That's where that plug goes. I have no tips, to be honest. There's like a little clip on it, a little like release. Press it and just keep pulling at it gently. Eventually it will come out. That's what happened to me. It looks like that O-ring that's in there was just maybe too dry or something. I don't know. And then also, so the part that's prone to cracking on the intake is that little tube. So you see where that hose clamp is down there? That hose clamp, that goes to the bypass valve on top. So that tube is actually connected to the plastic inlet, and that's where it's prone to cracking and breaking. So just be very careful when you're removing the bypass valve. The hose clamp that's on that silver pipe that keeps the bypass valve connected to the charge pipe, loosen that one as much as you can and then wiggle out the bypass valve. And now that I have this connector off, now I can pull out the whole inlet, and then once you get the whole inlet out, you can get the 2 bolts that are holding in the charge pipe. So here we have the inlet with the bypass valve still connected. That is perfectly fine. Leave this connected. But yeah, so here's the plug that I was talking about. Extreme pain in the ass to get off. This hose clamp Don't take it off. Honestly, don't take off the bypass valve from the inlet because that's probably how you're gonna break it. So right here my thumb is. This connection point right here, that's the weak point on this turbo inlet, and that's where it actually is prone to cracking. So just be very careful when you're taking this off. Do not put it at any crazy angles because you don't want this to crack. Unless you're gonna be replacing it, then by all means do whatever you want. I'm planning on reusing this one, so I wanted to make sure I don't break it. And then in here you can see this is what the inside of it looks like. So the aftermarket ones are pretty much just a smooth channel going across. There's not all these crazy like pockets and divots in there. So now that we have that off, and by the way, I don't know if I mentioned, but the bolts holding in the turbo inlet, those are 10 millimeters. Now we have plenty of room to get to the charge pipe. So here you go. Charge pipe is over here. There's the charge pipe connection. So there's a 12 millimeter here and another 12 millimeter. I already started loosening this one. You can't get to that other one unless you remove the whole turbo inlet. And then it's kind of dusty here, so I'm gonna clean it off a little bit before I put everything back together, just to make sure I have a nice seal. So once you have the charge pipe unbolted, there is a little gasket here. So you want to just make sure you save this gasket. It's similar to the one that was on the inlet pipe. I don't know if they're the same exact diameter, but this little guy here. So just take it off, just the way that this one looks at least. You see that little portion that's extended outwards? This part? This inlet is slotted. So this fits in that slot. This rubber portion is facing towards the turbo itself when you stick it on. So don't stick it on like this, with this little portion on the top. No. Flip it around like that. So this is just a quick little tip. Some of those bolts are kind of hard to get to, so you can't really fit a full like socket, like one of these. So it's kind of hard to fit one of these in there, so you kind of have to use a open-ended box wrench. If you don't have enough leverage, one thing you can do is, so let's say you have this part on the nut. What you can do is get another wrench that's a similar size, and for example, let's say I needed to turn this one this way to the right. I fit in here my other wrench just like that, and then now it adds like an extender, so now I have more leverage and I could turn more and have more torque. So that's what I did to loosen some of these bolts, because they're in pretty tough spots, and they're not like crazy tight honestly, but like they're still tight enough that with just a little wrench like this it wasn't enough leverage. So yeah, that's what I did. So now we have everything loosened underneath, everything unbolted. So the next step is to come up top, and this whole charge pipe should now be loose. So this guy, completely loose. There's nothing connecting it at the bottom. So now I gotta remove the whole charge pipe. So here is the factory charge pipe. I was able to remove that. Not too difficult. It's kind of tight in there, so wiggle it back and forth. Make sure you don't get caught in any of those lines down there. So next, you wanna go into your hardware kit, and then you wanna get the new turbo outlet flange. That's this guy right here. And then what you're gonna do is you're gonna get the original OEM seal and then fit it in here. And you have a little slot here. So that little tab that was sticking out on the seal, that will go here. And then to mount this, there's actually a couple bolts that were supplied with the kit. These are M8 by 20. These are 13 millimeter. So first, I'm gonna clean off the turbo outlet a bit because it's dirty, it's very dusty. And I wanna make sure I get a nice clean seal when I tighten everything up. So here I have the new outlet flange, and then I have the gasket pressed in there. Fits into the little slot. So now I'm gonna mount this onto the car. I already cleaned off the turbo inlet and outlet. On the OEM one, this little tab was facing towards the front of the car. So I'm gonna have it mounted the same way, but I don't think it really matters in which position. But I'm gonna mount it on the car like this. So this is facing the front. So you want to tighten this down all the way. So you want to make sure this is nice and firm. I don't know if there's any torque specs, to be honest. So I would just say tighten it until it's firm. Okay, so next you're gonna find this silicone coupling, and then you're gonna want to get a 60 by 80. There's like a little marking here. It says 60 by 80. This will go on the bottom. And then you also need to get a 40 by 60. This will go on the top. So then this will go on the turbo outlet flange. I have the hose mounted up in there. And also the 60 by 80 is actually facing upwards. The 40 by 60 is the one that's on the bottom. That's the one that goes on the flange. So put the hose clamp on there. Don't tighten it completely. You still want this loose so that this can move side to side, because we're gonna have to rotate it in the right spot to mount the bypass valve. So once you have that, you're gonna now want to mount the turbo inlet, and then you can put your intake back together. For that one, you're gonna need a 30 to 45 millimeter hose clamp, and this is the one that you're gonna use to tighten the bypass valve onto the silicone coupling over here. So once you have the inlet installed again, you can reconnect all these hoses, and then the hose also on the bypass valve, don't forget that one. And then the hose clamps for the bypass valve to the silicone coupling, make sure you tighten that down. And then the clamp that connects the coupling to the outlet flange. So make sure all those are tight, you're ready to go to the next step. And also, if you took apart your intake, you can reconnect everything. Don't forget, on the plastic inlet, turbo inlet, there's a little notch here at the bottom. So if you have an aftermarket intake, do not go over that little notch. You do that, you will get a leak. Okay, so once the inlet's all put back together, you're gonna go into your kit of parts, and you're gonna wanna find this tube here. So this tube is gonna connect to the turbo outlet. This part with the small bend in it, that's the one that you're gonna feed inside, and this is the one that's gonna go into the turbo outlet. So there is a hose clamp down there. Make sure the hose clamp goes over this, but leave it loose for now because we still gotta mount the rest of the piping on the top. So this is what it looks like once you have it in there. And sorry, I think I had it mixed up. This portion will stick up. Over here there's like a slight bend. That is what goes to the turbo outlet. Next, we're gonna work behind the intake manifold. So there's the bolt that we're gonna be removing. So I actually have the front of my car lifted up pretty high off the ground so I can get underneath. Pretty much done down there. I'm actually just gonna lower the car down a little bit. That way it's easier to get back there. So next, the instructions actually say to loosen the bolts under those two wires. There's like a white wire and a black one, because we have to remove this bolt right here. We gotta remove that bolt, and I guess apparently those wires kind of get in the way. I can't see underneath very well, so I don't know what size those screws are that are holding it in. I'm just gonna try to remove this bolt and hope that I don't run into any issues. There's a bolt on that side and then there's a nut on that side. Okay guys, so I finally got this bolt out. I was worried there for a bit, thought I was stripping the head of the nut, and there's no room down there to put a socket on the right side where that nut is. If I were you guys, especially if your car is old, if you have like a 2015 or 16, because I have a 16, I would say spray the bolt and the nut with like some PB Blaster or a little bit of WD-40. Let that soak in first before you even try to remove the nut, because the last thing you want is for you to start stripping it and then you try to spray WD-40 and it's already like kind of too late at that point. So I lucked out. My nut is kind of not rounded, but let me see if I can show you guys. You can see it started to kind of get rounded out a little bit, so I got really nervous. I was like, oh boy. But luckily, I got it out. And then with the new kit, well, when you put the intercooler, you don't even need this nut, because the intercooler has a nut built into one of the brackets. Those connectors, I mean, they kind of are in the way, but not really. Like, they flex enough or bend enough that you can get the bolt out of there without an issue. I wouldn't worry too much about those connectors if you can't find the nut to unbolt them. Next, we have to remove this bracket right here. So that bracket is where the left side of the OEM intercooler goes. On the new one, we don't need that. I guess we only have the two mounting points on the bottom, and there is a bracket on the right that we have to install. There's two bolts holding it in. So just remove those two bolts, and then you can get that bracket off. If you're running catch cans, so I already realized this before I even did the install. This catch can, for example, this is a PVC catch can, that mounts to that bracket. Since we're removing that bracket, I'm gonna have to figure out where to mount this catch can now. I have no idea. I was thinking maybe to use one of these bolts here that mounts the ECU. Maybe I'll get one of these and then I'll have it here. But I have to see where the intercooler piping ends up being, because that might be in the way. If you have a catch can, just be aware of that you might need to find out how to relocate it. Worst case, I'll just zip tie it somewhere temporarily so that at least it doesn't move, and at least I could drive around, and then eventually I'll find a place to mount it. Sorry guys, I lied. You don't have to take off this whole bracket, it's just the upper portion. So this is a 12mm. Leave the bottom ones in because this orange connector actually gets mounted to that bracket. So we're gonna leave that bottom portion, you just get rid of this upper portion. So next, we're gonna go to the intercooler and start mounting the brackets that go underneath. So you're gonna find 4 M8x15 screws, that's these guys. And then you find 2 angled brackets. So these are right angles. If you have a CVT WRX, there are some other brackets that came with the kit that are specific for the CVT mounting. I have a manual, so I'm gonna use these regular brackets. So there's one that has a built-in nut in it. This is the one that's gonna be facing, is gonna be on this side of the intercooler. So this is the inlet side, the part that goes to the throttle body. So the way you wanna mount it, just like that. And then the other bracket has like this little like cutout in it. That's gonna go on the charge pipe side, and that will go like that. Okay, so next we're gonna start setting up the throttle body coupling. We're not gonna use the OEM one. There's a supplied one. So look for the small one that looks like this. And then you want to get 2 hose clamps. You want to get a 60 to 80, that's for the bigger end, which is going to go on the throttle body. And then on the other side, you want a 50 to 70, and this is going to go on the intercooler. Now, just want to work on removing this guy right here. That guy right there. Okay, so to remove the OEM throttle body input, there is a hose clamp right here. So loosen this hose clamp and you should be able to pull this off. So here we have the OEM throttle body coupler. I finally got that off. And I have now the one that was supplied with Process West. There it is down there. It was kind of a struggle to get it off. Just keep pulling at it, make sure the hose clamps are fully loosened, and then eventually it will come off. Putting it on there was pretty easy. I have one hose clamp right by the inlet where it connects. I'm gonna put in the other hose clamp that's gonna connect to the intercooler. The next step is to actually get the intercooler installed. So I'm assuming you can do this as with one person. I'm gonna have my brother help me out, but I saw in the manual that it says to lift up slowly, lightly on here, so that way it's a little bit easier to get the intercooler in there because it's a big boy. Let's see how difficult it is to install this intercooler. And in case you guys wanted to see a comparison, here's the stock OEM intercooler, very thin, and here's the Process West VertiCooler, much thicker, wider, and will provide much more efficient cooling. Finally, I got the intercooler in its spot. It is a very tight fit, I'm gonna say that. Like, it is extremely tight. You can't just go horizontal, angle it inwards. That's not gonna work. What I did is basically, let's say this is the intercooler horizontally. I tilted it like this, dropped it in that way, fit in the coupling on that side, and then rotated it inwards, and I got into a spot. As you can tell though, it's not perfectly even. And then down below, I have to get this bolt through down there. So the bracket is in its right spot, but the right side is slightly higher up. I think it's because of this coupling. So the coupling down here. So that coupling needs to actually face slightly downwards from the throttle body. So the throttle body needs to angle slightly downwards, and then it'll fit fine. I have it in there, so if I just push down like this, I could eventually line it up, and I think it should be fine. There's like a hose back here that I was hitting down there. I don't know if it's anything super important, but it's not like anything crazy. Like I'm hitting it slightly. Actually, that's for the AC. All right, let me make sure I don't damage that. I like having AC. Yeah, so there it is. It is extremely tight. Like it makes use of all the available space down there, that's for sure. So yeah, I'm gonna see if I can get this bolt down there. And then I'm also gonna have to figure out how to reroute these hoses for my catch cans, because I can't just have them over like that. I'm gonna have them underneath. So I'll see how I do that. But yeah, it's tucked in there. It looks nice, that's for sure, in the engine bay. Okay, so I was able to get the bolt in there. It's right over here. I didn't tighten it all the way, but I did start tightening it, so at least I know that it's made it to the other side. So before I tighten it, I want to make sure I have this verticooler at the right angle. So in the kit, there is a bracket, this bracket. So this one's gonna go right here. And then you're gonna reuse, if you have OEM bolts, you can reuse the OEM bolts over here. I'm gonna use my 80DW1 hardware, reuse that there. And then for this side, this is where the intercooler mounts. There's a hole on the intercooler over there. So that hole we'll use, there's an M8 by 20, and then there's a nut as well. So what I'm gonna do to make things easier is I'm actually gonna put the bolt from the bottom up and then tighten the nut on top. And I feel like that will just make it easier. If I'm bolted, if I need to do that in the future for any reason. And then I think once you have that mounted, then you can go and tighten the hose clamps on the throttle body and the intercooler. Here's what that bracket looks like. So once you tighten the intercooler bracket to the intercooler itself, then you can go ahead and tighten that bolt at the bottom by the transmission, the bell housing bolt. And then also, you can go ahead and remove the little clip that was on the original OEM bracket, this clip right here. So this clip, there's a hole right here. And then now the brake booster line, I can connect. So this, maybe not. This is pretty far out from where the line is, so I guess I won't attach it. But, so maybe I'll just zip tie these like this and then call it a day. Once that's done, tighten the bolt at the bottom. Once that's done, we can start getting the rest of the intercooler piping. Oh, also, tighten the throttle body hose clamps, the one that's on the throttle body itself, and the one that's on the intercooler outlet. Okay, so the hose clamps by the throttle body are all tightened up. Don't go crazy with tightening them. Like obviously you want it nice and firm, but don't over tighten it because you don't want to accidentally strip the little head, the Allen head on the hose clamp, because then it's going to be tough to remove. So, you know, just make sure they're nice and firm. Don't go crazy. Then you get the other part of the charge pipe, this one, the one with the logo on it. And then there's two couplings. There's the thinner, longer one, and then there's a short, like stubby one. So the short, stubby one is going to connect this pipe to the inlet of the intercooler. And then the longer, smaller one is going to connect down here to this pipe. So I still have this pipe loose. I did not tighten the hose clamp to the bottom yet. Once I get this pipe in there situated in the right spots, then I'll go underneath the car, I'll raise the car up again. And I have to anyway because I got to install the skid plate. I'm going to get this all piped up and ready to go. And then also there's 4 hose clamps you're going to use. These are all, I believe, 60 to 80. So you're going to need 4 of these. 2 for that side, 2 for this side. I have the intercooler piping all done up here. Got the 2 hose clamps there. 2 hose clamps there. So those are all tightened down. So everything up top is now done in terms of intercooler and piping. So now the only thing left is the bottom part of this hose is not tightened down yet. So I'm gonna lift the car back up, go down there, tighten that up, and then you gotta put the skid plate back on, the undercover, the plastic tray, and then everything is done. Okay guys, so everything is all buttoned up, tightened up. Next step is actually super simple. There's like a little pulley cover. I already have it installed here, but there's just 2 bolts. The original, the OEM one, had a bolt up here and a bolt down here where my finger is. So just remove those 2 bolts and then you can mount this pulley cover. Just be aware, mine had some slight fitment issues. Like the holes on the pulley cover were too close inward, so I couldn't fit one of the bolts on there. So I just had to drill it out a little bit, or if you have a Dremel, that'll work also. So just mount that guy, super easy, nice and firm on there. Just make sure that you're not like hitting any of the pulleys when you mount it. Make sure it's nice and flat, the top part. The next step is to remove this upper panel so that we can start putting together the intake ductwork. And then to remove this, there's just a bunch of pop clips, and then you should be able to slide this off. Once you get the outer cover off, then you have to get this plastic piece off here. This one also has some pop clips. 1, 2, 3. There's a bolt here, bolt there, 3 clips on the side, 3 clips on this side, and then it looks like 1 clip on the bottom of each side, and then right in the middle there's another clip. Okay, after finally getting this plastic cover off, and there's a lot of clips, guys. There's like, I don't know, 20 clips or something like that, and then 2 bolts. So once you get that done, I believe this rubber piece, you can just pull on the edges and then have it separate. And there are these little clips here that are holding that rubber piece in place. So you just stretch out the rubber and you can get around the clip. Next, we need to remove these clips. I don't know if there's a way to do that without breaking them though. Like I saw online, like one guy who was doing this, he said he couldn't take them off, he just broke them. And I mean, if I look underneath, they have like this little dot. It looks like you could push them in, but I tried that didn't work. So I guess I'll just have to break all these off, which is unfortunate, but I mean, whatever. If you guys find a way to get these clips out without breaking them, let me know in the description, but that's the only way I know. And if I need to go back to stock, I feel like these clips shouldn't be that expensive to get from Subaru. These should be pretty cheap. Okay, so now you want to get the intake duct and line it up. And there's also a bunch of black screws and some silver washers, so you need 5 to get the top and the sides in. Well, actually no, I think just the top. The sides, there's like these little wings they use, and the wings have nuts in them. So you'll find out really quickly that, so the left side lines up very well with the holes on the top. The right side doesn't, and actually in the manual they say for maximum airflow, you're supposed to cut out this section here. There's like 2 blocks of plastic that you cut out. I'm not gonna do that. So I'm not sure how this side's gonna get secured, but I'm gonna start securing the top part. And then I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna stick the bolt through the bottom, have the nuts sticking out top. For the little winglets, these guys, you're gonna flip over the intercooler and then you're gonna slide them in like this. And then they actually line up perfectly. And then these winglets already have nuts on them. So you just have to make sure to align the bolt with the nut. And then there's 4 more bolts, and use those to secure these. And then after that, then we just have some weather stripping that we're gonna put to create a nice seal. This is fully mounted on there, nice and firm. I got the little winglets on there as well on the back side. These guys here. So the winglet that goes on that side, the one that doesn't line up with the holes, that one was very tight, let's just say, the holes. At first I thought the screw didn't fit, but then you just have to kind of work the screw in and out a few times to kind of like loosen it up in there, and then you'll be able to fit it nicely. And then now this is firm, this is on there, it's not going anywhere. So now you just got to get your weather trimming, and I think there's 4 pieces here. So you want to seal this whole part, so the sides, bottom, and the top. Weather stripping is all on there. This side is a little funky, the one at the bottom, because you kind of have this little piece that sticks out from the intake scoop, but then you're also trying to squeeze it against the plastic. So I'm just leave that one like that. I think it's okay. The rest of it looks perfectly fine, and they're perfect to fit, so you don't need to trim anything. If you run out of space in the corners, or let's say it's too long and you can't get the corners in, what I did, put these as far to the corner as possible, tuck them in, and then this side also tuck it in, and then as I'm in the middle, start squeezing it in. And then it seems to form like a really good shape. And then you don't have to worry about running out of trimming on the ends. So yeah, now that this is done, this I think was the last step, guys. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put this on the car, turn the car on, check for leaks, and then if everything's good, then you just close it all back up. Alright guys, here is the finished product. And here is the intake duct I was putting together in the last clip. I forgot to show me putting it back on, but here's what it looks like all completed. And then on the top, when you look through the scoop, you actually have a little Process West logo, which is pretty cool. This was a very difficult install, honestly one of the hardest installs I've done, but I'm very happy with the final results. As you can see, it looks really nice in the engine bay, and it's surprising that this thing even fits. It's like a really good use of space, really good packaging from Process West. And the product itself, high quality stuff. This is really good. Once you have the intercooler installed, you don't need a tune according to Process West, so even if you have a bone stock car, you can throw on this intercooler. Should work just fine. I will note that I had a slight issue after installing the intercooler. So shortly after this, I installed my downpipe, and then I ran the off-the-shelf tune from Cobb, the Stage 2 Plus tune, just temporarily until I can get a proper tune. I noticed that when I was like in vacuum and up to like 3 PSI, there were certain ranges where instead of my intake temps dropping, they were actually increasing, which was really, really weird. I checked all of my piping and hose to see if there was an air leak and maybe hot air was leaking into the engine, the intake, but honestly, it wasn't. Once I got a proper tune, everything worked fine. Now, when I'm running this car, as long as I'm, moving, the intake temps hover around like 10 to 20 degrees above ambient. And if I'm like under boost, it can go very close to ambient. So for example, if it's like 70 degrees outside and I'm under boost, I see those intake temps drop all the way down to like 72, 73 degrees sometimes. And when I'm just casually cruising, they don't go above 90 if it's 70 degrees. Typically it hovers around 10 degrees above ambient when you're moving. So yeah, for anybody who's trying to push power on these cars, highly recommend it. It's a lot more efficient than the stock intercooler. I don't know exactly what the stock intercooler numbers were for intake temps. Unfortunately, I didn't monitor that before I installed this guy. But all I know is that this works much, much better. And I'm only pushing 300 wheel horsepower, so nothing crazy, and like 315 wheel torque. But this thing does help the car run a lot more efficiently. And if you're gonna be pushing power, you wanna put as many supporting mods as you can. Also for me, I was just trying to do all the bolt-ons possibly because that's what I wanted to do for this car. And yeah, very happy with it. No complaints whatsoever. I will say difficulty-wise, probably like a 9 out of 10. In terms of results and satisfaction, 10 out of 10. Very happy with it. If you found this video helpful, like, comment, subscribe. I have a few more videos. I have a downpipe video coming up, a video of my actual dyno tune, and just a couple other miscellaneous videos here and there. So yeah, thanks for watching.